My aunt raised her glass and announced that the family legacy was only for real blood, not strays like me. The room went silent, everyone dining on wealth salvaged by the $80 million I secretly lent them. They cursed the vulture fund circling their company, never suspecting I was the one holding the leash. Tomorrow, the secret ends. They have 45 days to pay me back, or I take the empire they claimed I was never worthy to inherit. My name is Chloe Bennett. I am almost 40 years old, a financial advisor based in Chicago. And for tonight, I was the silent observer at the far end of the Lockwood family's ancestral dining table. The mansion, nestled in one of those sprawling, wealthy suburbs that smell of old money and exclusion, was cocooned in a fresh blizzard. Outside, the world was a blur of white and black, silent and heavy. Inside, it was a performance of warmth. A grand fireplace crackled, its light reflecting in amber waves off the heavy crystal glasses. The room was aggressively festive, smelling of expensive Pinot Noir, roasting beef, and the faint, waxy scent of burning candles. Every detail was perfect, from the heavy, ornate silverware to the impossibly thin china, and it was all a lie. This entire scene, this performance of enduring Lockwood prosperity, was funded by me. The wine they were sipping, the roof over their heads, the very company that gave them their name, it was all running on my money. Money I had provided 7 years ago to save them from total collapse. At the head of the table, presiding like a queen on a throne of inherited privilege, sat my Aunt Margaret. She is somewhere over 60, though she'd sooner die than admit it. As the chairwoman of the Lockwood Fabrication Group, she was the matriarch, the iron fist in a velvet glove. Tonight, her glove was a diamond bracelet that glittered every time she dismissed someone. Her silver hair was coiled perfectly, her dress a severe, expensive navy. Her eyes, when they landed on me, were always cool, analytical, and dismissive. I was not family. I was the project her sister, my adoptive mother, had taken on before she passed. I was the adopted niece. To her left sat her brother, Edward, the official CEO. Edward was a man made of softened edges and quiet anxieties. He was completely dependent on his sister's spine, a fact that seemed to drain the color from his face with each passing year. He was the one who had pleaded for my help all those years ago, but he never had the courage to thank me for it publicly. Then there were the children. The true heirs, Preston, Margaret's son, was in his early 30s, possessing all the confidence that only profound, unexamined incompetence can provide. He sat with a proprietary slouch, as if he were already measuring the drapes. He believed, with the certainty of a zealot, that he was born to inherit. His sister, Lila, sat next to him, her face illuminated by the blue light of her phone, which she only occasionally lowered to sip her wine. Lila lived a life funded entirely by family dividends, her only visible job being the curation of a flawless social media presence. Tonight, the conversation was strained, circling the same topic it always did when they thought I wasn't listening: the terrible, crushing pressure of their debt. "It's this ArcLight Capital," Preston said, sawing at his roast beef with unnecessary force. "They're squeezing us. It's predatory. What they're doing. Vultures." Lila looked up from her phone, her expression momentarily troubled. "Are they going to stop the dividends because my trip to Aspen is non-refundable?" Edward flinched, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "We are managing the situation. Lila, it's just their terms are inflexible. They have a representative at every board meeting. It's stifling." "Vultures," Preston repeated, pleased with the word. "They're trying to steal a family company." I kept my gaze fixed on the intricate pattern of my plate. I swirled the expensive wine in my glass, the wine I had paid for. I listened to them curse the name of ArcLight Capital. I listened to them spin theories about the shadowy, anonymous fund that had saved them with an $80 million lifeline. They had no idea that ArcLight Capital was just a Delaware shell corporation, a legal firewall created by my attorney. They had no idea that the shadowy fund was me. I was the vulture. I was the one holding the $80 million leash that kept their prized company from floating away. I was the representative at the board meetings, not physically, but through my proxy, Noah, who reported every one of their foolish, entitled decisions back to me. The meal dragged on. The snow fell harder. Finally, Margaret tapped her glass with a silver knife. The sound was sharp, cutting through the low murmur of complaints. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it commanded the room. Everyone sat up, even Lila, who put her phone face down on the table. Margaret stood, her glass held high. The diamonds on her wrist flashed. "We are living through a trying time," she began, her gaze sweeping over her son, her daughter, her brother. "We are being tested by outside forces, forces that do not understand what it means to build something, to have a legacy that goes back 3 generations. Her eyes scanned the table, passing over me as if I were a piece of furniture, a part of the hired help. "But the Lockwood family endures. We endure because we are bound by blood. We are bound by a shared history that no one can take from us." She paused, taking a deliberate sip. "I have spent the last few weeks with my attorneys, finalizing the new estate plan, ensuring the future of the Lockwood Fabrication Group. I am securing this family's legacy." Preston smiled, a smug, satisfied expression. Edward looked relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted. And then, Margaret looked directly at me. For the first time all night, she truly saw me. Her eyes were cold, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. She held my gaze as she delivered the killing blow. "This legacy, this company, this family," she said, her voice clear and sharp as breaking glass, "is for real family. It is for those who share Lockwood blood. It is not for someone who just carries the name on paper." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the snow outside. It was the sound of 30 years of my life being erased. 30 years of trying, of being the perfect, grateful orphan. 30 years of excellent grades, of building my own success to make them proud, of quietly fixing the problems they were too arrogant to see. 30 years of sitting at the far end of the table, hoping one day they would pull the chair closer. Edward wouldn't meet my eye. He studied his napkin with intense focus. Lila was already checking her phone again. Preston just looked pleased, as if his divine right had finally been publicly affirmed. They all understood, and they all pretended not to hear. Here, Preston said, raising his own glass. "When Arclight finally eases up on those ridiculous terms, we can get back to running things properly. We'll take back the power that is ours, without needing anyone else's help." Lila murmured her agreement, tapping a like on her screen. Something inside me, a tightly wound coil of hope I had carried since I was a child, finally snapped. It didn't break with a bang. It just went cold. The quiet, desperate need to be accepted, to be chosen, to be real, died right there at the dinner table, somewhere between the beef and the dessert. I had spent 7 years keeping them afloat. 7 years of listening to my proxy, Noah, describe how he had to repeatedly stop Preston from investing in ridiculous vanity projects, or stop Margaret from buying a new corporate jet. 7 years of being their silent, unrecognized savior, all while they continued to treat me as the outsider, the charity case. And now, they had made it clear, even if I saved the world, I would never be one of them. Slowly, I raised my own glass. The gesture caught Margaret's eye. She looked surprised I had the nerve. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile, the kind I used in difficult negotiations right before I walked away from the table. The mask of the grateful niece slipped, and the face of the financial advisor, the woman who managed billions, looked back at her. "I understand, Aunt," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Everyone will get exactly what they deserve." Her eyes narrowed, confused by the shift in my tone, but I had already moved on. In my mind, I was miles away from this suffocating room. I was back in my apartment in Chicago, looking at the city lights. I was pulling up my calendar, I was scheduling a call for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The subject line was simple: Lockwood Fabrication Group. The attendee was Noah. The agenda was a single item: call the loan. The decision wasn't made in anger. It was made in the cold, clear space that anger leaves behind. That night, after the dinner, I drove back to my apartment in Chicago, the Lockwood Mansion, with its forced warmth and old money carpets, felt 1,000 miles away from the clean, glass and steel reality of my life. The story, the real story, began 7 years ago. 7 years ago, the Lockwood Fabrication Group was not a legacy. It was a corpse waiting for a shroud. They had made a catastrophic bet, pouring nearly $100 million they didn't have into a new automated assembly line that failed. It was Preston's grand idea, a way to bring the company into the 21st century, which really meant firing half the workforce and buying shiny, impressive robots. The robots didn't work. The contracts couldn't be fulfilled, and the debt was astronomical. The banks, all the old family friend banks, had turned their backs. The Lockwood name, once a guarantee of credit, was now toxic. They were weeks, not months, from a Chapter 7 liquidation. And then, my grandmother died. Not my real grandmother. Of course, Margaret and Edward's mother, Ruth Whitmore. She was my adoptive mother's mother, and the only person in that entire sprawling, suffocating family who had ever truly seen me as more than a project. While my adoptive parents were alive, they were kind, but distant. After they died in a plane crash when I was 12, Ruth was the one who sat with me. She was the one who told me, "Blood is just biology. Chloe, loyalty is a choice." She had her own money, separate from the Lockwood fabrication fortune, old money, from her side of the family, real estate, blue-chip stocks, an empire she had quietly managed and grown herself. The will reading was a scene I will never forget. It was held in the same stifling mansion library. Margaret and Edward sat in the front row, dressed in performative, expensive black. They looked sad, but expectant. They were waiting for their mother's wealth to be the final piece of their salvation, the miracle that would plug the hole in their sinking company. The lawyer, a dry man who smelled of paper, read through the usual bequests: the house, the art, the personal effects, all divided, and then he got to the investment portfolio, the real money. All remaining assets, including all stock holdings, real estate trusts, and cash accounts, he read. I leave entirely and solely to my granddaughter, Chloe Bennett. The silence in that room was louder than any scream. I remember seeing Margaret's hand, the one resting on the arm of the chair, clenched so tightly her knuckles went white. Edward just seemed to deflate, a puppet with its strings cut. They had to congratulate me. Of course, they pulled me into stiff, papery hugs. "We're so happy for you, Chloe. Your grandmother loved you so much. What a wonderful, wonderful surprise." Their faces were masks of civilized grief, but their eyes were glittering with rage. They were enraged that this woman, their own mother, had given their birthright to me, the stray. It took Edward 3 days. He showed up at my old apartment, unannounced, looking haggard. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Chloe, the company is dying." He laid it all out: the failed automation, the banks, the impending ruin. He wept. It was a pathetic, terrible thing to see. And then he used the one weapon he knew I couldn't defend against. "It was your mother's legacy," he said, his voice thick. "Her father built it. She loved it. Please, Chloe, don't let your mother's legacy be destroyed. I am a financial advisor. I know a bad investment when I see one. The Lockwood Fabrication Group was a bad investment, but this wasn't finance. It was family, or so I thought. My first instinct was to help, to give. I considered an equity injection. I would use Ruth's money to buy a massive stake in the company. I would become a partner. I would save them. And in doing so, I would finally be one of them. I would have earned my seat at the table. I even drafted a proposal. But then, I thought about Margaret. I thought about her cool, dismissive eyes. I thought about every Christmas dinner where I was seated next to the children's table. even in my 20s. I realized that if I became an equity partner, I wouldn't be seen as a savior. I would be a leech. They would take my money, and they would resent me for it. I would be the adopted niece who used her lucky inheritance to buy her way into a company she had no blood right to. I stalled. I told Edward I needed to think, and I made a call. Noah Sterling. We had come up together at the same investment bank in New York, two outsiders in a world of legacy admissions. He was sharper than I was, more ruthless. He'd left the bank to start his own boutique advisory, specializing in complex, high-stakes financial structuring. We met at a bar in the West Loop. I told him everything: the family, the will, the dying company, Edward's plea. When I finished, he just sipped his whiskey. "So, you're going to buy into a failing company run by idiots who hate you," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have to help," I said, weakly. "It's my mother's legacy." Noah leaned forward. "No, Chloe, it's not. Your mother's legacy is gone. Your grandmother's legacy is the money she gave you, and the intelligence she knew you had. Don't you dare waste it on these people." He sketched it out on a cocktail napkin. "You don't want to be a partner," he said, his pen scratching. "Partners have to go to meetings. Partners get outvoted. Partners get blamed. You want to be the bank. The bank doesn't get blamed. The bank gets paid." He proposed a structure, a new, anonymous trust, based in Delaware. We would call it the Northline Trust. It would be funded by me, but the paperwork would be a fortress, completely untraceable. Northline would then extend a loan to the Lockwood Fabrication Group, not an equity injection, a secured loan. "How much do they need?" he asked. "They're bleeding. To fix the line and pay off the urgent debt, $80 million, minimum." $80 million, he whistled. "Okay, we give them $80 million, and in return, we take everything as collateral: the factories, the land, the equipment, the brand name, the accounts receivable." He smiled, a cold, sharp smile I knew well. "And," he added, "we get personal guarantees from Margaret and Edward, their houses, their personal stock portfolios, everything they own. If the company defaults, it's not just the company we get, it's them." I hesitated. "Noah, that's brutal." "It's not brutal. Chloe, it's protection. You're not their family, you're their lender. Don't ever forget that." He tapped the napkin. "This is the knife. If you're going to step into this fight, you'd better be the one holding it." We drafted the agreement. The interest rate was low. A single point above prime. That was my concession to sentiment. That was the family discount. But the terms, the covenants, the collateral that was all Noah, it was ironclad. We presented the offer through a law firm. The Lockwoods never saw my name. They saw a lifeline from a faceless entity called ArcLight Capital, the public-facing name we gave the trust. They signed the documents in a single afternoon. So desperate for the cash, they didn't even read the fine print. Margaret herself signed the personal guarantee, pledging her mansion and her inheritance, without a second thought. To her, it was just paperwork standing between her and survival. The $80 million wire hit their account 48 hours later. That was 7 years ago. For 7 years, I have lived 2 lives. In one life, I was Chloe Bennett, the successful financial advisor, the adopted niece who was so lucky to be included in Lockwood holidays. I sat at the end of the table. I listened to Preston brag about his new car and Lila complain about her personal shopper. I listened to Margaret talk about the legacy and the blood and the tradition I was not a part of. I was never, ever invited to a family-only discussion about the company. In my other life, I was Northline Trust. As a condition of the loan, Noah Sterling was appointed to the Lockwood board as a non-voting observer, representing ArcLight Capital. He was my eyes and ears, and my veto. I have a file on my server. It's 7 years deep. It contains the proposal from Preston to pivot into luxury aviation by buying a fleet of aging corporate jets. Noah killed it. It contains the $5 million rebranding initiative from Lila, which involved a new logo and a company-sponsored trip to Paris for influencers. Noah killed it. It contains Margaret's multiple attempts to drain company cash to pay for a new wing on the mansion, disguised as executive entertainment expenses. Noah killed every single one, for 7 years. I have not only funded their lives, I have actively, secretly, protected their company from their own greed and incompetence. I have kept the wolves at bay, only to realize the wolves were running the house. And for 7 years, at every holiday, Margaret has made a point of reminding me, in small, cruel ways, that I did not belong. Which brings me back to my apartment. The snow has stopped, and the lights of Chicago are glittering like a carpet of cold diamonds. On my monitor is the signed loan agreement, the one Margaret and Edward signed without reading. My finger slides across the glass screen of my tablet, past the covenants, past the interest schedule, until it lands on Article 4, Section 2. At the sole discretion of the lender, the entire principal balance and all accrued interest shall become immediately due and payable in full, for any reason or for no reason, at any time following the 7th anniversary of the loan's origination date. The 7th anniversary was last August. They think I'm the stray. They think I'm the one who needs them, the one who should be grateful for scraps from their table. They have no idea I'm not the guest. I'm the owner of the restaurant, and I've just decided to shut it down. I woke up before my alarm, just as the first gray light of a Chicago dawn began to separate the river from the concrete. My apartment is on one of the higher floors, overlooking the water. From this high up, the morning traffic on the bridges didn't look like cars. It looked like a data stream, red lights and white lights, flowing in predictable patterns. It looked like the market tickers I watch all day. It looked like money. I sat there, wrapped in a silk robe, and watched the city come to life, feeling a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The knot of anxiety, of trying, that had lived in my stomach since I was a child, was gone. In its place was a cold, quiet certainty. At precisely 8 o'clock, my phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Call Noah Sterling. I tapped the video call icon. Noah's face appeared a second later, sharp and alert, already in his office in New York, a stark white wall behind him. He looked like he'd been at work for hours. "Chloe," he said, "no small talk." He never used small talk when we were discussing Northline. "Noah," I replied. My voice was steady. It didn't waver. "The call is for the Lockwood file." "I assumed," he said. "Are we proceeding with the standard 6-month renewal?" I looked away from his face, out at the river of cars. "No," he waited. "Don't renew the loan," I said. "Call it effective today." Noah, to his credit, didn't so much as blink. He simply steepled his fingers, his expression shifting from an advisor to a strategist. "Call it," he repeated, testing the words. "Just so we are 100% clear on the operational details. Chloe, calling an $80 million secured note means we send a demand for immediate and full repayment. They won't have it." "I know," I said. "They have no liquid assets. The market value of the company is, frankly, less than the debt. All of their assets, corporate and personal, are collateralized to us. A full call means we are not just pushing them into bankruptcy. We are triggering the mechanism to seize every single thing they own: the company, the brand, the factories, the house Margaret signed against, the stocks Edward pledged." "I understand," I said. "The standard cure period in the agreement is 45 days. He continued. "After that, we file for foreclosure and seizure. This is not a negotiating tactic. Chloe, this is a kill shot. Are you certain?" I thought of Margaret's cold eyes. I thought of Preston's smug, assured smile. I thought of Edward, looking at his napkin, choosing silence. I thought of 30 years of being told, in 1,000 different ways, that I was not real. "I spent 7 years," I said, my voice as calm and flat as the river below, "keeping them alive. I spent 7 years saving them from themselves, protecting their legacy, cleaning up their messes, and they used those 7 years to sit at my table, drink my wine, and tell me I am not family." I looked back at the screen. They're right. I'm not. I'm their creditor. A slow, understanding nod from Noah. The professional check was complete. The order was given. 45 days, I confirmed. I want it done by the book. No extensions. No negotiations. Understood, he said. He was already typing. We have 2 documents. First, the official demand letter from ArcLight Capital's legal counsel. It will be delivered by secured courier to the Lockwood corporate headquarters and to Margaret and Edward's primary residences. It will be on their desks by 3 o'clock this afternoon. It will state the terms $80 million plus accrued interest, payable within 45 calendar days. Good, I said. And the second letter? He asked. The second letter? That was our contingency. The one we'd prepared years ago and never used. It was a simple, 1-page document. A sworn affidavit from me, Chloe Bennett, stating that I was the sole and exclusive beneficiary of the Northline Trust, and therefore the ultimate owner of the ArcLight Capital Fund. It was the bomb. Hold that one, I said. I don't want them to know it's me. Not yet. I want them to panic. I want them to scramble and call their banks and realize no one will help them. I want them to curse the vulture fund that Margaret is so fond of talking about, the reveal that comes later, if they try to fight. Holding it, he confirmed. Chloe, this will be messy. They will go to the press. Let them, I said. The contract is ironclad. You made sure of that. I did, he said. The call is made. I'll confirm when the letters are signed for. The call ended. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop, passed the firewalls, and opened the Northline file. For a moment, I just looked at the folder structure. 7 years of reports. 7 years of board minutes, proxy notes, and financial analyses, all sent from Noah. I clicked on a file from 5 years ago. Project Ares, acquisition proposal. I remembered this one. Preston's game-changing idea. He had wanted the company to acquire a bankrupt competitor, a move that would have cost $20 million we didn't have and added nothing but redundant, failing infrastructure. He'd given a passionate speech at the board meeting. Noah had sent me the audio about aggressive expansion and making a name for ourselves. I read Noah's dry formal notes from the file. Representing ArcLight Capital, I must formally veto this expenditure. The acquisition target has a debt-to-equity ratio that is fundamentally unsound. Northline Trust will not permit the company to leverage itself further for what appears to be a vanity project. Preston had been furious. He'd accused ArcLight of stifling his vision. I closed the file and opened another. Operations FY21. This one was different. This was Margaret's. She had proposed closing the original Lockwood factory in South Chicago, the one that employed over 400 people, many of whom had been there for decades. She wanted to move all production overseas to a non-union plant, a move that would have given her a temporary 20% bump in profit margin, which she and Preston could then take as a larger dividend. I read my own notes, which I had dictated to Noah. ArcLight Capital's position is that the long-term health of the company relies on its skilled domestic workforce and its Made in America brand integrity, which is its primary asset. Any move to liquidate that asset for a short-term gain will be seen as a breach of fiduciary duty. We formally block the proposal and the associated capital request. I had saved 400 jobs, 400 families. I had protected the actual legacy that their grandfather had built, not the empty, gilded legacy Margaret talked about over dinner. I read file after file. The vacation home in the Bahamas, disguised as a corporate retreat, the fleet of new cars for executive use, the consulting fees paid to one of Lila's friends who ran an influencer marketing blog. I had blocked it all, patiently, silently. Each one of those vetoes, which they saw as the act of a predatory fund, was me. It was me, the adopted niece, protecting them from their own staggering, bottomless incompetence. Every word in those files was a nail in their coffin. Every line was proof that Lockwood blood wasn't a legacy. It was a liability. A brief, sharp pang of something pity perhaps hit me. Edward. He was weak, not cruel. He was the only one who had ever, in 30 years, Told me he was proud of my success, even if he said it in a whisper at a Christmas party. When Margaret was in another room, should I warn him? Give him a heads up. I thought of the dinner. I thought of his averted eyes, his trembling hand on his water glass. He had sat there, silent, and let his sister execute me at the table. He knew the company was running on the fumes of a loan they couldn't pay, and he still said nothing. His weakness wasn't a defense. It was a partnership. He was a coward, and cowardice is just cruelty taking the easy way out. No, I would not warn him. He made his choice, over and over. For 30 years, he would stand with his sister, and now, he would fall with her. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Noah. Courier has confirmed delivery. All 3 packages signed for. The clock is running. I closed the laptop. The sun was higher now, reflecting brightly off the side of the building opposite me. I stood up and walked to the full-length mirror by my door. I looked at my reflection. I had spent my entire life trying to see a Lockwood staring back, trying to find some angle, some expression that would make me fit in. But the woman in the mirror wasn't a Lockwood. She wasn't a desperate to please, grateful to be here orphan. She wasn't a niece. She was a creditor, and she was about to collect. The envelope was delivered by a courier who demanded a signature. It was heavy, cream-colored, and bore the embossed return address of a law firm Edward Lockwood had never heard of. He opened it with a letter opener, a silver antique from his father's desk. He read the first line. He read the numbers. $80 million. He read the deadline. 45 calendar days. His hand, the one holding the letter, began to shake so violently that the heavy paper rattled. The numbers seemed to lift off the page, swimming in his vision. He fumbled for his desk chair and missed it, sinking heavily onto the edge. No, he whispered to the empty oak-paneled office. No, this is a mistake, a tactic. His first call was to his primary bank, the one his father had golfed with the chairman of. David, it's Edward Lockwood, he said, his voice a tight, high-pitched version of its own. I've received a ridiculous letter from this ArcLight Capital. They're calling the note, all of it. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. David's voice came back, all the warmth gone, replaced by a clinical chill. Edward, I'm looking at the lien filings. ArcLight Capital, or rather the Northline Trust, is the sole senior secured lender. They have a first position lien on every asset, every piece of equipment, every account receivable, every patent, every parcel of land. You're pledged to the hilt. David, we need a bridge loan. Edward pleaded. Just to negotiate. Against what? Edward? David's voice was sharp. You don't have a single unencumbered asset left. Not one. You signed them all over 7 years ago. I'm sorry. My hands are tied. There's nothing here to lend against. Edward's hand was still shaking when he dialed his sister. Margaret received the news while sitting in the solarium of her mansion. When Edward's panicked, reedy voice finished explaining. She calmly placed her phone on the glass table. She stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then, with a single, violent sweep of her arm, she cleared the table, a heavy crystal vase, a silver tray, and her half-full wineglass smashed against the stone floor. Vultures, she screamed, her voice echoing in the sunlit room. That bastard from ArcLight, that's Northline. They are thieves. They are trying to steal my father's company. The emergency meeting was called for 7 o'clock that evening. At the mansion, it was family only. Preston and Lila arrived together, their faces a mask of confused outrage. They huddled in the library, the one where Ruth's will had been read. 80 million. Preston was pacing, running his hands through his hair. They can't just ask for 80 million. That's insane. It's not liquid. What does this mean for us? Lila asked, her voice trembling. Does this mean the dividends stop because I have a payment due on the new Mercedes? I can call Binky, Preston said, snapping his fingers. And Chad? We'll raise the capital ourselves. A few friends, a few million each. We'll start our own fund. We'll buy out these ArcLight vultures. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He paused. Would Binky, whose father was in private equity, really throw $10 million at a company that was already in default? Would Chad, who was still living on his own trust fund, even answer the call? He put his phone back in his pocket. "We need a new strategy," he said, pouring a large brandy. "Mother will handle this." "This is a family matter," Margaret announced. Sweeping into the library, her hair was perfect. She had changed into a fresh silk blouse. "This is about our blood, our legacy. We will not be bullied. We will find a solution, ourselves." They talked for hours, spinning fantasies of white knight investors and patriotic bank managers who would save a true American company. Not one of them mentioned my name. My phone rang at 8:30 that night. I was in my office, watching the market trackers close. The caller ID read, "Edward Lockwood." I let it ring 3 times, then answered, my voice placid and professional. "Hi, Uncle Edward, everything all right?" "Chloe," he said, his voice painfully, artificially bright. Yes, fine, my dear. I was just calling to check on you. We haven't talked much since the other night. How are you settling in for the winter?" The banality of it was stunning. The largest financial crisis of his life was exploding. His entire world was 45 days from evaporating, and he was calling me to ask about the weather. "I'm fine, Uncle," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Work is busy. You sound a little stressed." "Oh, no, he said, with a laugh that sounded like a cough. "Just, end-of-year projections. The usual. And then I heard it. In the background, muffled but distinct, was Margaret's voice. She was not whispering. "Get off the phone with her. Edward, what are you doing? Don't drag her into this. This is family business. She's just the adopted niece. There are no legal ties. For God's sake, don't make her think she's important." Edward's breath hitched. I heard him clear his throat. "Well, Chloe, I should let you go. Just wanted to say hello." "Of course," I said, my voice like ice. "Good to hear from you. Uncle, good night." I hung up the phone. I sat in the silence of my high-rise office. The city lights reflected in the dark glass. It was the second time in less than 24 hours. The second time they had drawn the line. Not only would they not ask me for help, they would actively avoid telling me, for fear I might get the wrong idea. The idea that I was important. They would rather drown. They would rather go down with the ship, clinging to their tattered flag of blood, than turn to me and admit they were sinking. They would rather be broke and real than saved by someone who was just on paper. My computer chimed. It was a secure message from Noah. "Update as of 6:00 p.m. Eastern. Lockwood's representatives have made formal inquiries to 3 major commercial banks, J.P. Morgan, BOFA, and 1 foreign sovereign wealth fund. All have given preliminary rejections. Citing Northline's senior secured status, they are boxed in. They have no moves. Awaiting your instructions on press strategy, as we can expect an inbound shortly." They were trapped, and they knew it. An hour later, another message. This one was not from Noah. It was a text from an unsecured number. But I knew who it was. Ben Carter, a young financial reporter I'd met at a conference 2 years ago. He'd been drowning in student loans, and I'd spent an hour over coffee giving him a pro bono restructuring plan for his debt. He had never forgotten it. His message was short. "Chloe, I know you're in finance. This might be on your radar. Got a tip from a family friend of the Lockwoods. They're trying to spin this story. This is the draft my editor wants me to run. Thought you should see it. Off the record." Below, he pasted the text. The headline was, "Vulture Fund Targets Historic American Family Business for Destruction." The article was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It quoted an anonymous family source, Lila, undoubtedly who spoke of generations of hard work and community ties. It painted the Lockwood Fabrication Group not as a mismanaged, failing entity, but as a beloved local institution. And it painted Arclight Capital as a shadowy, inhuman force, a Wall Street predator, with no motive but greed. that was ripping the heart out of a family and putting hundreds of American jobs at risk. It was perfect. It was a complete, slanderous lie. And it was exactly the story they would tell. I stared at the text on my phone, the lie, the performance, the absolute refusal to accept reality. Margaret wasn't just going to fight me in the boardroom. She was going to fight me in the press. She was going to paint herself as the victim, and me the anonymous, faceless me as the monster. I smiled. For the first time, I understood. This wasn't about the $80 million anymore. It was about the narrative. It was about who got to tell the story. It was about who, in the eyes of the world, was the real family, and who was the vulture. And I realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that I was the only one who knew the entire story. And I was tired of letting them hold the pen. I didn't go to the meeting. That was Noah's stage, and he was the only actor I needed. The press story Ben had sent me was just the beginning. Margaret was on a warpath, leaking stories to every friendly journalist she knew, painting herself as a victim. Her strategy was to make this so public and so ugly that the Vulture Fund would retreat, fearing the bad press. She underestimated the vulture. I instructed Noah to call an emergency board meeting, not at the mansion, not at a neutral lawyer's office, but at the corporate headquarters, the real one, a low-slung, 70-year-old brick building in South Chicago, surrounded by a chain-link fence and the smell of industrial lubricant. I wanted them to sit in the heart of the company they were so willing to gamble with, in a room that smelled of stale coffee and manufacturing reports. Noah called me as he was walking in. "They're all here," he said, his voice low. "Margaret, Edward, Preston, and Lila. Lila looks like she's about to be sick. They all look like they haven't slept since your courier visited." "Good," I said. "Is the projector ready?" "It is. They look relieved that it's just me. They clearly thought they were going to be facing some Wall Street titan, not the man who's been politely listening to their nonsense for 7 years." "Let them be," I said. "You know the script. Stick to it." "Always," he said, and hung up. The rest of the meeting. He recounted to me later, in precise, vivid detail. He entered the old wood-paneled boardroom. The air was thick and stale. The 4 of them were huddled at one end of the long table, a united front of misery. Edward was pale, his hands visibly shaking. Preston was trying to look defiant, but just looked sullen, like a teenager who'd been grounded. Lila was pale, staring at her phone with dead eyes. And Margaret. She was impeccable, as always, in a severe charcoal suit, her hair perfect, but there was a wildness in her eyes, a frantic energy just beneath the surface. Noah set his thin leather briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a single file and a USB drive. He did not sit. Before he could even speak, Margaret attacked. "So this is it," she snapped, her voice sharp. "After 7 years of your involvement, you're going to pull the plug. You're going to destroy a 3-generation American company for a few points on a spreadsheet." Noah, in his calm, measured voice, replied, "Mrs. Sass, Lockwood, this is not a pulling of the plug. This is a formal response to a breach of contract, but we are not here to discuss that. We are here, at the request of Northline Trust, to review the financial stewardship of the company you were entrusted with." "Stewardship?" Preston scoffed. "We were doing just fine until you people put a financial gun to our heads." "Were you?" Noah said. He plugged the USB drive into the port at the head of the table. The old projector whirred to life, casting a bright, harsh light on the screen. The first slide popped up. Vetoed capital expenditures fiscal years 2018 to 2024. "Let's review," Noah said, his voice pleasantly academic. "In 2018, Project Ares, a proposal to acquire a fleet of 3 Gulfstream G550s for executive travel, cost $32 million, vetoed by Northline." Margaret flinched. That had been her pet project. "In 2019, Noah continued, clicking to the next slide, a brand revitalization initiative proposed by Ms. Lila Lockwood cost $5 million, including a fact-finding mission to Paris for influencers, vetoed by Northline. Lila sank lower in her chair, her face burning red. In 2020, Project Titan, a proposal by Mr. Preston Lockwood to acquire a failing competitor to signal aggressive expansion, cost $20 million, plus assumption of $12 million in unsecured debt, vetoed by Northline. Those were bold strategies. Preston slammed his hand on the table. They were visionary if you hadn't stifled us. We could have doubled our profits. We could have paid you back twice over. Or, Noah said, his voice dropping, you would have been bankrupt 5 years ago. He clicked to the final, most important slide. Proposal South Chicago plant closure overseas relocation, 2021. The room went dead silent. A proposal, Noah said, his voice now carrying a distinct, cold edge. Authored by Mrs. Lockwood, to close this very building, to terminate the employment of 417 workers, severing a 70-year-old community tie, in order to chase a temporary 20% margin bump in a non-union facility, vetoed by Northline. He turned from the screen to face them. Northline Trust, he said, is not just your lender. For 7 years, it has been the only adult in this room. It has been the sole entity protecting this company from you. We didn't just keep you solvent. We kept you from committing corporate suicide. Repeatedly. Edward looked like he was going to weep. Margaret's face was a mask of pure, distilled rage. And now, Noah concluded, the trust has decided that its protection is no longer a viable business strategy. The family's tactic, as I knew it would, shifted instantly from aggression to desperation. You can't do this, Edward whispered, his voice cracking. It's just a bad year. The market is tight. We just need time. 6 months, Margaret said, the words forced through her teeth. Give us 6 months. An extension. That's all we ask. We can find new financing in 6 months. 12, Preston added, trying to regain some footing. 12 months, and we can turn this all around. Noah shook his head. No extensions. Why not? Margaret demanded. It's a reasonable request. We are the family. Because, Noah said, you are not in a position to make requests, and because the terms of your agreement, which you all signed on October 14th, 2017, are explicit. He tapped the file folder. Article 4, Section 2, the lender may call the note, in full, for any reason or no reason, at any time following the 7th anniversary. The 7th anniversary has passed. The call has been made. You have, he checked his watch, 41 days left. That was when Margaret played her last card. The one I knew she would, the blood card. You don't understand, she said, her voice suddenly soft, pleading. She looked at Noah, the matriarch appealing to the man. You're just a representative, a man in a suit. This isn't just numbers to us. This is us. It's 3 generations. It's my father's name on that wall. You can't put a price on that. You can't just seize a person's blood. Noah listened patiently. And when she was finished, he gave the reply I had written for him. Mrs. Lockwood, he said. The owner of the Northline Trust understands the concept of family better than you can possibly imagine. In fact, it is because they understand family and legacy that they were the only ones in the world willing to give you the $80 million when no one else would. The words hung in the stale air. A new, dawning horror crept into their faces. The implication. Preston was the first to voice it, his voice a hoarse whisper. Who is it? Who is the owner? Who have you been working for? Who would do this to us? Noah looked at each of them, one by one. Margaret, Edward, Preston, Lila. You will learn their identity in due time, he said, closing his file. For now, I am their voice, and my instructions are to inform you that if payment in full or a wire transferable proof of funds is not received by the deadline, Northline Trust will file to begin foreclosure and seizure proceedings at 9 o'clock the following morning. He packed his briefcase, He turned off the projector, plunging the room back into its dim yellow light. He walked to the door. He told me he paused, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at them. 4 statues of privileged panic. As he walked out, he heard Edward finally break, a low sobbing sound. But he also heard Margaret, her voice, clear and cold, cut through her brother's grief. He heard her say to her son, "Stop it. Stop this sniveling. At worst, we let it go bankrupt. We'll start over. Lockwood blood is still Lockwood blood, with or without that building." When Noah told me that last part, I felt the last, tiny, microscopic ember of sentiment die. The part of me that had wondered if, at the last minute, I would feel pity and stop it all. She was right. Blood was blood, and a contract was a contract. She had just confirmed, in her own words, that the company, the legacy, the people, meant nothing to her. It was all just a prop for her ego, and she had just given me the final, moral permission I needed to take that prop away. Margaret's final. Cold words in the boardroom. Lockwood blood is still Lockwood blood had an unintended consequence. They severed the last thread of emotional attachment I had to the name, but they sharpened my focus on the assets. The assets were not just machinery and buildings. They were 400 people in South Chicago who were about to be caught in the crossfire. I told Noah to arrange a meeting, not with lawyers, not with bankers, but with the man whose name I'd seen on every operational report for 7 years, Samir Delgado, the plant manager. We met at a small, Formica table coffee shop in a strip mall a mile from the factory. It was the kind of place that sold donuts and weak coffee in styrofoam cups. Worlds away from the Lockwood mansion, we went to a back booth. Samir was in his late 50s, with deep lines around his eyes and the calloused, capable hands of a man who knew how to fix a machine himself. He looked tired. He had, as Noah had put it, been with the company for 25 years. He was the company's real memory. He looked at Noah, whom he recognized from the tense, quarterly walkthroughs. He looked at me, a stranger, with polite, guarded curiosity. "Mr. Sterling?" he said, his voice gravelly. "I appreciate you meeting me. I don't know who this Arclight Capital is, but the rumors on the floor are—" He shook his head. "They're bad. People are scared. They think you're a vulture fund, here to sell us for parts." "What are they afraid of, Samir?" I asked, my voice quiet. He turned to me, and I saw the deep, paternal fear of a man responsible for others. "Afraid of," he said, with a dry, humorless laugh. "Chloe, may I call you Chloe? These aren't just jobs. This is a community. I have 3 guys on my line who just bought their first homes. I've got Maria, in finishing, whose daughter just got into the University of Illinois. They're paying for that with the salary they earn in that building." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "These people, they've given their lives to this company. They've put up with a lot." "A lot?" Noah prompted, his face impassive. "The family," Samir said, as if it were a dirty word. "We all know they're flighty. We've weathered their stupid ideas for years. But this $80 million call, this is different. This is an extinction-level event, and they're not even here. They're not talking to us. They're hiding in their mansion, and I'm the one who has to walk the floor and look these people in the eye." I watched him, my heart clenching. He was the real CEO. "Samir," I said, "I need to know what you think of the company, the real company, not the family, the factory." He looked at me, his gaze sharp, suddenly seeing me as more than just Noah's assistant. "The factory. She's old, but she's solid. The workforce is the best in the Midwest. Skilled, loyal, proud. We've been running lean for years, covering the overhead from corporate." Then he said the line that stopped my breath. "We almost lost it all. You know, back in 21, Margaret Mrs. Lockwood, she wanted to shut us down. This whole plant, move everything to some factory in Southeast Asia, fire all 400 of us. She said we were legacy costs and too expensive. What happened? I asked, though I knew. This guy, Samir said, nodding at Noah. He stopped it. Your fund, Northline, Arclight, whatever you call yourselves. He flew in, called an emergency meeting, and told them that if they tried to liquidate the domestic workforce, the fund would see it as a breach of the loan covenants and call the note right then. He saved us. He saved all of us. Samir looked at Noah, not with anger, but with a deep, weary respect. We've always known you were the ones with the real power. We just never knew what your plan was. Are you here to save us again? Or are you the ones finally pulling the trigger? I bit down, hard, on the inside of my cheek. I tasted blood. He had just confirmed it. The Lockwoods were willing to burn their own people for a percentage point, and I, the vulture, was the only one who had stood in their way. I looked at Noah. He looked at me. The decision was made. Samir, I said, leaning forward, the Lockwood family is going to lose this company. That is no longer a question. That process has begun. They have made their choices, and they will now face the consequences of them. His face fell. So, it's over. You're seizing the assets. You'll sell it for scrap. No, I said. I'm seizing the assets to save them. From the Lockwoods. I laid it out. Noah had already, in the past 48 hours, made a call. He had a relationship with the CEO of a major competitor, Midwest Apex Industries. They were a large, stable, well-run industrial conglomerate, and they were looking to expand. Here is what is going to happen, I said, my voice all business now. Northline Trust is the senior secured creditor. That means we are first in line. When the 45 days are up, the Lockwoods will default. We will then use our $80 million debt to credit bid for the assets in the foreclosure auction. This is a legal move. It means we use the money they owe us to buy the company, clean and clear. This will wipe out all other equity. It will wipe out the Lockwood family's ownership, completely. Samir looked confused. So you'll own the company? For about 5 minutes, Noah interjected, picking up the thread. Midwest Apex Industries is a motivated buyer, but they don't want to get into a messy bankruptcy fight with the Lockwoods. We have already negotiated an agreement in principle. The second Northline takes possession of the assets. We will execute a prepackaged sale, selling 100% of the fabrication assets, the factory, the machinery, the brand, the client list to Midwest Apex. Samir's face was still grim. A new owner, that just means a new boss. Probably one who will clean house. No, I said, putting my hand on the table. This is the entire point. The sale to Midwest Apex is contingent. It has one unbreakable condition. The South Chicago factory stays open. The entire current workforce is retained. And, I looked at him. They are to promote the current plant manager, Mr. Samir Delgado, to Chief Operating Officer of the new division. Samir stared at me. He just stared, his mouth opened, but nothing came out. They have already agreed, Noah said calmly. For them, it's a bargain. They get a world-class, fully operational factory and a skilled workforce for pennies on the dollar. And they don't have to deal with the incompetence of the Lockwood family. We're not selling them a problem. We're handing them a solution. Would you do that? Samir's voice was thick. Why? Because, I said, and the words came from that cold, clear place inside me. I have been in charge of this company for 7 years, and I'm tired of the people at the top ruining it for the people who actually do the work. The Lockwood blood family isn't the only family I see here, Samir, and it's not the one I'm interested in protecting. This was the moment. This was the clean break. The Lockwoods, with their blood and their legacy and their name, were one entity, the company, the 400 jobs, the factory, the real legacy that was another. I would save one. I would let the other face the consequences. I stood up, pulling a document from my briefcase. It was the agreement in principle with Midwest Apex. I signed my name at the bottom. As the authorized representative of the Northline Trust, I was now officially, the holder of two keys. One would lock the door on the Lockwood dynasty forever. The other would open a new one for everyone else. Go back to the plant, Samir, I said, sliding the signed paper back into its folder. Don't tell anyone this. Not yet. Just walk the floor, and know that they're safe. The company is safe. The family will get what it deserves. The article hit the Chicago Tribune's business section 3 days later. Lila had done her job well. The headline was exactly what Ben had warned me about: Vulture Fund targets historic American family business for destruction. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. The photo they used wasn't of the grimy South Chicago factory. It was a soft focus, 20-year-old picture of the Lockwood mansion at Christmas, covered in snow and glowing with warm light. The article opened with a quote from Margaret, who had apparently wept during the interview. "We are a family," she was quoted as saying, her voice thick with emotion. "We built this company from nothing. My father and his father before him. We are a patriotic American business, and we are being torn apart by a faceless, heartless fund that has no stake in our community, no motive but pure, unadulterated greed." I read the digital version, my coffee untouched on my desk. The comments section was already filling up with sympathetic locals. "This is what's wrong with Wall Street," one wrote. "Leave the Lockwoods alone." The article went on. Margaret heavily emphasized the 3 generations of blood that had run the company. "This is our legacy," she said. "We are the real family. We are the ones who have kept this company alive. These entities, who don't even exist in a will, who have no human connection, they have no right to come in and destroy what we have built," I noted, with a cold, precise anger. What was missing? There was no mention of the multiple catastrophic business decisions, no mention of the vetoed corporate jets or the Paris influencer trip, and, most importantly, not a single word about the 2021 plan to fire 400 people and move production overseas. The very people Margaret was now claiming to be protecting were the ones she'd been ready to sacrifice for a 20% margin. My phone buzzed. A private message from Ben Carter. "Hey, Chloe. Saw the final print. I'm sorry. The family's lawyer sent a cease and desist to my editor, claiming defamatory and tortious interference. They threatened a massive lawsuit. My editor caved, stripped all the negative context I'd dug up. They're good at this. They're playing the victim, and it's working," I typed back. "I know. It's fine. You did what you could." I closed the article. Margaret had just made her public move. Now, it was time for her private one. It came, like clockwork. That afternoon, a call from Margaret herself. Her voice was completely different from the victim in the paper. It was warm, honeyed, and thick with a false nostalgia I hadn't heard in years. "Chloe, darling," she said, the word darling hitting my ear like a foreign object. "I know things have been so tense lately, so much business. I feel like I haven't had a real conversation with you in ages. I'm having tea at the house tomorrow. Just us, like we used to. Will you come?" Like we used to was a lie. We had never had tea, but I understood the play. She had tried the press. Now she was going to try the family angle. "Of course, Aunt," I said, my voice just as sweet. "I'd love to." I arrived at the mansion at 2:00. She was in the solarium, the same one where she'd smashed her wine glass. A full tea service was laid out on the glass table, which had been repaired. Scones, clotted cream, tiny, perfect sandwiches. "Chloe," she said, rising and pulling me into a stiff, perfumed hug. "You look wonderful, so successful. Your mother, she would have been so proud." This was her opening salvo. The ghost of my mother. She poured the tea. "I've been thinking so much about her lately," she said, her gaze distant, aimed at the snow-covered lawn. "And about you. I remember the day we brought you home from the children's home. You were so small, so quiet. We just fell in love with you." I sipped my tea. It was scalding. I said nothing. "Your grandmother, Ruth, she loved you so much, and she left you so very well taken care of. a truly massive amount of money, more than any of us. In fact, she let that hang in the air. She knew you were special. Grandma Ruth was very good to me, I said, my voice neutral. She was, Margaret said, her voice shifting, becoming conspiratorial. And Chloe, she left you that money because she knew you understood what family meant. She knew you would always protect the family, the way we protected you. I put my cup down. Aunt, I'm not sure what you're asking. This is this ArcLight business, she said, waving her hand as if swatting a fly. It's a nightmare, a misunderstanding. They're just bankers. They don't understand legacy. They don't understand blood. She leaned in, her diamonds glittering. The company is in a temporary storm. Darling, it just needs a bridge, a small injection, from someone who understands, someone who is inside. Inside, I repeated. If you, she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper, were to use just a small part of what Ruth left you, just to help us get through this storm, it would be the most wonderful gesture. It would prove what we always knew, that you are truly one of us, a real Lockwood, in your heart. She sat back, smiling, as if she had just offered me a kingdom. And, she added, of course we would make sure you were recognized. In the future, I've been meaning to adjust the estate plan for years. We would make sure you were properly included. In the future, it was the vaguest, most insulting promise she could possibly have made. In the future, not now, not on paper. So, let me be clear, I said, and my voice was no longer sweet. It was the voice I used in my Chicago office. You are in default on an $80 million loan. You are asking me to give you more money, on top of that, to pay down a debt you can't afford. Her face tightened. It's not giving, Chloe. It's helping. It's family. It's finance. Aunt Margaret. So, let's talk terms. If I were to help, where would my name be on the paperwork? Would I be a shareholder? A partner? Would I get a board seat? Replacing, say, Preston. The smile vanished. She looked horrified. What a board seat, Chloe. That's not how this works. The board, the ownership, that's for the line. That's for Preston and Lila. It's a blood right. So I'm not family when it comes to ownership, but I am family when it's time to pay the bills. Is that it? She was cornered, and she did what she always did. She got cruel. You don't understand, she hissed, her face ugly. We took you in. We gave you our name. You should be grateful. I am grateful for my mother and father, I said, my voice ice. And I'm grateful for my grandmother, but this is a business transaction. No, it's not, she said, her voice rising. It's about loyalty, and you're proving you have none. You're just like this ArcLight, all numbers and no heart. And then, the fatal slip. The line I had been waiting for. Besides, she said, standing up, her voice dripping with the contempt she had hidden for 30 years. You're just the adopted niece. Chloe, there's no blood tie. There's no legal, no moral obligation for us to share the real legacy with you. I hadn't moved. My phone, which had been resting in my lap, screen side down, had its record function running. I had started it the moment she mentioned my mother. I stood up. Thank you for the tea. Aunt, it's been illuminating. Is that a no? She snapped. Are you really going to sit there, with all of Ruth's money, and watch this vulture fund destroy your family? I am going to let the terms of the contract play out, I said, just like any other lender. I walked out of the solarium, her stunned, furious face behind me. The follow-up was even more pathetic. The next day, I received a formal legal document via email from the Lockwood family lawyer. It was a proposed agreement. If I, Chloe Bennett, voluntarily agreed to lend the Lockwood Fabrication Group $10 million at 0% interest. For an indefinite term, the Lockwood Family Trust would sincerely consider adding my name to a secondary non-voting trust, to be funded at their discretion at a later date. It was, legally, toilet paper. It was an insult. It was a request for a $10 million donation in exchange for nothing. I forwarded the email to Noah. I attached the audio file from my tea with Margaret. My message was simple. Add these to the file. Title it, Exhibit a Real Family. I want every single word they say about blood and legacy to be used against them in the bankruptcy hearing. He replied 1 minute later, with pleasure. The final move, I learned a day later, was Margaret's campaign to the extended family. She began calling every distant cousin, every aunt and uncle, every person with even a drop of Lockwood blood, to tell them the story. But not the real story. She told them that the vulture fund was one thing, but that the real betrayal, the real serpent in the garden, was me. That I, Chloe, blinded by the money Ruth had left me, had become greedy. That I had sided with the bankers against my own family. That I had been offered a chance to help save the legacy and had refused. She was, quite methodically, poisoning the entire family tree against me, preparing for a final family council vote to what publicly disown me. It was pathetic. I sat in my office, watching the snow fall. She was playing checkers. She was fighting over a narrative. I was playing chess, and I was about to take her queen. I called Noah. Change of plans, I said. The next meeting, the final one, before the deadline expires. I'll be there. You're sure? He asked. You're breaking cover. She's made this about real family and blood, I said. She's made this about me. Fine. If I'm the one on trial, I'm going to be the one on the stand. It's time she faces the person she's been slandering, and it's time she faces her creditor. The deadline was 48 hours away. 45 days. We had given them 45 days, and they had spent 43 of them leaking stories to the press, holding panicked, useless family meetings, and in Margaret's case, trying to emotionally blackmail me over tea. They had not, in all that time, presented a single viable financial plan. They had not contacted a restructuring firm. They had not attempted to liquidate a single personal asset. They had simply, stubbornly, believed that their blood would make the problem go away. The final meeting was called by Noah, at our request. It was at the same South Chicago headquarters, in the same stale, fluorescent-lit boardroom. It was set for 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 days before the final bell. Noah walked in first, his leather briefcase in hand. He set it down. A moment later, I walked in behind him. The reaction was instantaneous. All 4 of them, Margaret, Edward, Preston, and Lila, were huddled at their end of the table, looking pale, exhausted, and bitter. When they saw me, they looked, for a split second, completely, utterly confused, as if I had walked into the wrong room, as if the adopted niece had wandered away from the Christmas dinner and ended up in the adult business meeting. I was not wearing the simple, dark dress of a family mourner or a holiday guest. I was wearing a black, severely tailored suit. My hair was pulled back. I was carrying a briefcase identical to Noah's. Preston recovered first, his confusion curdling into pure, indignant rage. "Chloe," he barked, actually half standing. "What the hell are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. It's about the company." "Get her out," Margaret snapped, her eyes flashing. "This is a private, family business matter. You have no right." I said nothing. I just walked, my heels clicking on the old linoleum, to the chair next to Noah, and sat. I placed my laptop on the table. Noah spoke, his voice calm and even. "Ms. Bennett is here at my request. She is serving as a special advisor to the Northline Trust in this matter." "A what?" Preston sputtered. "An advisor. She works in finance, for God's sake. This is a massive conflict of interest. She's family." "Is she?" Noah asked, his voice genuinely curious. "Your mother has spent the last month telling the press, and every member of your extended family, that Ms. Bennett is, in fact, not family, that she is a greedy outsider who sided with the bankers. You can't have it both ways. Preston, is she family? In which case she has a right to be here? Or is she an outsider? In which case she is, as I said, a financial advisor whom we have retained for her expertise. Preston's mouth opened and closed. He looked to his mother. Margaret, ever the strategist, saw the trap. She changed tactics instantly. Her face, which had been a mask of rage, softened into one of deep, tragic disappointment. She looked at me, not as a banker, but as a failed daughter. "Oh, Chloe," she said, her voice a low, theatrical tremor. "This is what you've become. After everything your mother, after we brought you into our home, we gave you our name, we loved you, we always took care of you, and you choose to sit on that side of the table with them, with the vultures who are trying to destroy us." I looked at her. I looked at this woman, who had, at that dinner, declared me not real. I looked at her, who had recorded a tearful interview about her patriotic company, days after trying to fire 400 people. "I am sitting where I belong, Aunt," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through her performance. "Let's begin," Noah said, before she could respond. "The deadline for repayment of the $80 million note, plus interest, is 5:00 p.m., Friday. That is in 50 hours. This is your final opportunity to present your plan for repayment." "This is inhuman," Edward whispered. His first words. He was visibly shaking, his face the color of ash. You can't. It's a family." "You want to talk about family, Uncle?" I said. I opened my laptop. I plugged it into the projector. Noah's projector. The whirring sound filled the room again. "Chloe, stop this," Margaret commanded. "This is not your place." "On the contrary," I said. "It is. Noah and I have been reviewing the file, all 7 years of it. I thought as an advisor I should share what I found." The first slide lit up the screen. It was a simple list of dates and wire transfers. October 2017, $80 million wire from Northline Trust. March 2018, $5 million capital injection to cover payroll. August 2019, $2 million emergency loan to cover vendor defaults. "We're aware of the loan," Preston said, rolling his eyes. "That's why we're here, you idiot." I ignored him. I clicked to the next slide. Vetoed capital expenditures. The same list Noah had shown them, but with more detail. The Gulfstream jets, the Paris trip, the failed acquisition. "The lender," I said, walking slowly to the screen, "seems to have spent the last 7 years not only funding you, but protecting you from yourselves, saving you from decisions that would have bankrupted you 5 years ago." Margaret was rigid. "This is not your concern, Chloe." "It is now," I said. I clicked to the final slide. It was a collage of scanned emails from Edward, emails he had sent, over the years, to the anonymous ArcLight Capital representative to Noah. I read one of them aloud. "To the ArcLight representative," I recited, my voice echoing in the small room. "I cannot express my gratitude. This payroll injection has saved us. You have saved my mother's legacy. My family and I are eternally in your debt. God bless you." That was you, wasn't it? Uncle Edward, after the $5 million injection. Edward went from pale to white. I pointed to another. Thank you. Your intervention at the board meeting was wise. My son is ambitious. But you saw the danger. You have, once again, proven to be a true friend to the Lockwood family." I turned off the projector, plunging the room back into its sickly light. "For 7 years," I said, walking back to my chair. "This inhuman vulture fund has been the true friend to the Lockwood family. This faceless banker has been the savior of your legacy. This predatory lender is the only reason you still have a company to sit in." I looked directly at Margaret. "So, I'm just curious, Aunt, as an advisor, what would you do if you were that lender? What would you do if you had spent 7 years saving a family, only to have them spit in your face, call you a vulture, and tell you that you weren't real?" The implication hung in the air, thick and toxic. Lila was the one who got it first. Her eyes widened, her phone slipping from her hand and clattering onto the table. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." Preston looked at her, then at me, his face a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension. "You," he breathed. "It was you." Edward just shook his head, a low, moaning sound. "No, no, Chloe, no." Margaret said nothing. She just stared at me. Her face was no longer angry or sad. It was a blank, terrifying mask of absolute hatred. She finally saw me. "That," I said, "is not relevant to this meeting." I sat down. "The relevant question is, how do you intend to pay?" They were broken. The revelation, even half-spoken, had shattered their reality. And in that moment, they made their final, pathetic play. "A partnership," Edward stammered, looking at his sister, who was still staring at me, unblinking. "Margaret, tell them. A partnership." "What?" Noah asked, playing his part. "A debt for equity swap," Edward said, gaining a pathetic shred of confidence. "It's a common strategy. You don't want the company. You just want control. So, take it. Convert half the debt, 50 million. Convert it to equity. You'll be a partner, a shareholder, with us, with the real family. We'll run it together." He was offering to make me a partner in a company that was, by all rights, already mine. He was offering me a minority stake, to work alongside the very people who had proven their incompetence, as my reward. Noah didn't even look at me. He had my instructions. "No," he said, flatly. "What?" Preston cried. "Why not?" "It's a good deal." "You're in charge. Northline Trust," Noah said, as if reading from a script, "has absolutely no interest in becoming a minority shareholder in a poorly managed, insolvent company. We are not partners. We are not family. We are the secured creditor. The offer is not accepted." He stood up, and I stood with him. This is... Margaret finally spoke, her voice a low snarl. "This is immoral. We are a family. We have a history. We have a legacy. We deserve better than to be treated by some faceless, godless fund." I zipped my briefcase. I looked at her. One last time. In this room. "You're right about one thing. Aunt," I said. "You're a family. But what does family mean? What does it mean? When the only person in the world who put her entire inheritance on the line to save you is the one you call an outsider." The room was silent. The truth of it, the sheer, crushing weight of it, had finally landed. "The offer stands," Noah said, his voice hard. "You have 50 hours. 5:00 p.m., Friday. If we have not received a wire transfer for the full amount, we will be filing the foreclosure petition with the court at 9:00 a.m. on Monday." We turned and walked to the door. We didn't look back. We were in the hallway, the door swinging shut. When I heard it, it was Margaret's voice. It was not a whisper. It was a scream of pure, unrestrained venom, meant for me to hear. "That girl," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "After everything, if she were real family, if she had one drop of our blood, she would never have sided with those goddamn vultures against us." I stopped in the hallway. I looked at the chipped paint on the wall. Noah put a hand on my arm. "Chloe, don't." I just nodded. I didn't need to. She had just signed her own death warrant. She had just confirmed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that even with the full truth laid bare, she still saw me as that girl. Not as her savior, not as her equal, not as her creditor. She had just made the next 2 days very, very simple. There was no turning back. The 45 days ended. The wire transfer never came. The auction was not held at the factory, nor at the mansion. It was held in a beige, windowless function room at a convention center near the Chicago courthouse, a place of neutral, bureaucratic endings. The room was set up with rows of folding chairs, most of which were filled. There were men in cheap suits from bottom-feeding private equity funds, a few curious competitors, and the lawyers for every creditor involved. The Lockwood family arrived, as a group, 10 minutes late. They were, of course, impeccably dressed. Margaret was in a funereal but expensive black suit. Preston wore a dark tie, attempting to look solemn and in charge. Lila was pale, wearing sunglasses indoors, her hand clutching her brother's arm. Edward just looked absent. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last month, his expensive suit hanging off his frame. They all had the dark, bruised circles under their eyes, of people who had run out of time. They still walked with that air of Lockwood entitlement, as if expecting the proceedings to part for them. They scanned the room, clearly looking for the man from Arclight. They were still looking for a single person to blame. They were still, I realized, hoping for a miracle. They believed, in their core, that people like them didn't really lose, not like this. They thought Noah would relent, that he would see them, and offer a last-minute deal. I was already seated. I wasn't at the back. I wasn't at the end of the table. I was in the front row, at a table marked Secured Creditors. I sat between Noah, who looked as calm as if he were ordering coffee, and a very sharp-looking woman I'll call Ms. Davis, the CEO of Midwest Apex Industries. She was here, as a courtesy, to watch the transfer. For the first time in my life, I was sitting at the money table. And the Lockwoods, for the first time in their lives, were not. They were in the audience, with everyone else. Margaret's eyes found me. She froze. Seeing me there, next to Noah, in that chair, was a calculation she had not made. She saw me not as her niece, but as part of the legal machinery assembled against her. Her face, for a split second, was not angry, it was just empty. The look of a general who finally understands the map. A man in a rumpled suit, an officer of the bankruptcy court, stood at the podium. He read from a script, his voice a monotone drone. "We are here for the matter of the foreclosure auction of assets belonging to the Lockwood Fabrication Group, as per the default judgment." He droned on, citing legal codes and file numbers. "We will proceed with the auction of assets. As itemized, bidders must be registered. All sales are final." He cleared his throat. "Before we begin with the primary assets, we must note the standing of the senior secured creditor, Northline Trust, operating as Arclight Capital." A murmur went through the room. "Northline Trust," the man continued, "holds a senior secured note in the amount of $80 million, plus accrued interest. As such, they are a primary, secured creditor, and they retain the right to credit bid against the assets, up to the full value of their outstanding debt." He looked out at the room. "Are there any questions regarding the right of the senior creditor?" Silence. This was the moment. Everyone in that room, the other funds. The competitors understood. It was over before it began. Why would you bid $10 million in cash for an asset when the man next to you could bid $80 million without spending a dime? You don't come to an auction to compete with the bank that already owns the house. The other bidders were just here for the scraps, to see if anything fell off the table. But the Lockwoods were not financiers. They were a family, and they had one. Last, pathetic play. A moment. It was Preston, standing up. He had no right to speak, but he did anyway. "My family has a proposal, a final offer." The court officer looked annoyed. "This is an auction, sir, not a negotiation." "A new investor," Preston said, his voice cracking with desperation. "We have a private investor, prepared to make a significant offer to keep the company, to keep it in the family." Margaret was on her feet, her hand on her son's arm, a look of grim triumph on her face. This was their miracle. "We have a registered bidder," she said, her voice carrying. "Mrs. Amelia Vance, who is prepared to make an offer on certain assets to satisfy the debt." Amelia Vance. I knew the name. A friend of Margaret's from the country club. Rich, divorced, and, I suspected, very foolish. "Very well," the officer said, sighing. "The first lot is Asset A, the residential property at 415 Grove Lane. Margaret's mansion, which she had personally pledged, valued at $8 million. A woman in the back row, Amelia Vance, raised her paddle. $10 million, she said. A few of the scrap bidders looked surprised. It was a high bid. $10 million, the officer said. Going once, twice. Credit bid, Noah said, his voice quiet. Of $11 million. Margaret's head snapped around. She looked betrayed. She thought this woman was her friend, but Amelia Vance, despite her wealth, was not here to get into a bidding war with a mysterious $80 million fund. She immediately shook her head, lowering her paddle. Sold, the officer droned. To Northline Trust. The miracle had lasted 30 seconds. Their last-ditch effort to save the house had failed. The mansion was gone. Now, the officer said. To the primary lot. All remaining assets of the Lockwood Fabrication Group. The factory, the land, all machinery, all patents, all client lists, and the brand name, Lockwood Fabrication itself. We will open the bidding at $40 million. Silence. The room was just watching us. Do I have an opening bid? A man in the back, from a small fund, raised his paddle. $40 million, he said, testing the water. I have $40 million, the officer said. He looked at Noah. Noah didn't even raise his paddle. He just spoke, his voice filling the quiet room. Credit bid, $65 million. The man in the back, the $40 million bidder, laughed. He made a zip motion across his lips and leaned back in his chair. He was done. I have a credit bid of $65 million, the officer said. He looked around the room, a formality. Going once, going twice, sold, to Northline Trust. It was that fast. 2 words from Noah. $65 million, which was just a number on his ledger, an entry against the $80 million they owed. I watched them. I watched the real family. Lila was openly crying, her face buried in Preston's suit jacket. Preston was just staring at the podium, his face white, stunned, finally, totally defeated. Edward was looking at his hands, and Margaret, she was watching me. Her face was granite. She was watching me as the court officer signed the paper, as the gavel tapped. She was watching me as her father's name, her grandfather's name, was legally, officially, and irrevocably stripped from her and handed to a faceless trust. It was an erasure. Her name, which she had wielded like a weapon her entire life, was now just an asset on a balance sheet, an asset that belonged to me. But it wasn't over. As the officer called for a 10-minute recess, Noah stood up. Ms. Davis, the CEO of Midwest Apex, stood with him. They, along with the court officer and their respective lawyers, moved to a signing table in the corner of the room. The Lockwoods just sat there, frozen, watching. Noah placed a new set of documents on the table. What is this? Margaret's lawyer, a man who had been silent all morning, finally spoke. The auction is over. The auction is, Noah said. This is a subsequent transaction, as is our right as the new owner. He signed the first page. Ms. Davis signed the second. Noah, his voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear, said, We have executed the pre-negotiated sale of all assets associated with the Lockwood Fabrication Group to Midwest Apex Industries, effective immediately. The court officer nodded. This was all clean, all pre-filed. And, Ms., Davis said, her voice clear and strong, as the new owners, Midwest Apex is pleased to announce our first operational decision. She looked at her own lawyer, who nodded. We will be retaining the entire workforce of the South Chicago facility. Furthermore, we are promoting Mr. Samir Delgado to the position of Chief Operating Officer of the new division. This was the twist, the real one. This wasn't just a seizure, it was a transfer. It was a surgical removal of the cancer and a preservation of the patient. Samir, who I had told to be at the back of the room, just in case, stepped forward. He was wearing a new suit. He looked terrified, and 10 feet tall. He walked past the Lockwoods. past their empty, stunned faces, and stood with Ms. Davis. That was what broke Margaret. "No!" she shrieked, the sound tearing through the quiet room. "No, you can't. That's our legacy. You stole it. You stole my father's company." She was on her feet, pointing a shaking finger at Noah, and then at me. "Thieves, you planned this. You." The court officer banged his gavel. "Mrs. Lockwood, you are out of order, security." Her own lawyer put his hand on her arm. "Margaret, stop. It's legal." "It's not," she screamed, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. It's not fair. It was ours. It was our blood." The lawyer, a man I suddenly pitied, looked her dead in the eye. "Margaret, you signed the personal guarantee. You signed the collateral agreement. I have the copies. You did this, 7 years ago, of your own free will. It is done." It was the finality of that. "It is done." Margaret seemed to shrink. The fight went out of her, all the blood, all the legacy, all the real family. It all evaporated, leaving just a woman in an expensive suit, who had made a bad bet. She turned, and with as much dignity as she could muster, she walked out of the room. Preston and Lila scrambled after her, like children following a fallen queen. Edward was the last to leave. He paused at the door, and he looked back. He looked directly at me. His face was not angry, it was just empty. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not of forgiveness or understanding, it was a nod of acceptance. The acknowledgement of a force, a fact, that he was too weak to fight. And then he was gone. The room was quiet. "Well, Ms. Davis said, shaking Noah's hand. "That was efficient?" She turned to me. "Your trust drove a hard bargain, Ms. Bennett, but the conditions retaining the staff, promoting Delgado, that was unusual. You've handed us a healthy, well-managed asset, with the rot at the top already excised. We're grateful." I just nodded, zipping my briefcase. The story wasn't over. I knew it. Noah knew it. The credit bid was for $65 million. The mansion had sold for $11. That was $76 million. The debt was $80 million. Plus 7 years of accrued, compounded interest. The math was simple. They were still on the hook. The company was gone. The house was gone. But the personal guarantees they had signed, those were still very, very real. The fight wasn't over. It had just moved to a new, much smaller, much more personal battlefield. The final meeting took place 1 week after the auction. It was not in a sterile convention center, nor a suffocating mansion. It was in a glass-walled conference room on the 47th floor of a lawyer's building in downtown Chicago. My lawyer's office. It was neutral territory, chosen for its distinct lack of memory or emotion. I was there. Noah was there. And the 4 Lockwoods were there, huddled on the opposite side of a gleaming mahogany table. Their lawyer, a man named Harrison, who looked like he hadn't slept, sat at the head, shuffling papers. Preston, Lila, Edward, and Margaret. They were no longer the family at the head of the table. They were just 4 individuals in expensive, rumpled clothes, their faces pale with exhaustion so deep it looked like a sickness. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrison began, his voice dry. "We are here to finalize the deficiency judgment following the foreclosure auction of the Lockwood Fabrication Group." He put on his glasses, as if to shield himself. "As you know, the outstanding debt to Northline Trust, with 7 years of accrued, compounded interest, totaled approximately $94,800,000. He looked at his clients. "The auction of all assets, including the corporate holdings and the Grove Lane property, recovered a total of $76 million. This leaves a deficiency, a remaining, unsecured personal debt, for which Mr. Edward Lockwood and Mrs. Margaret Lockwood are jointly liable, per the personal guarantee they signed in 2017. "Get on with it, man," Margaret snapped, her voice a low rasp. "What's the number?" Mr. Harrison flinched. "The deficiency, the outstanding personal debt, is $18,840,000 and change." 18 million. Lila's voice was a tiny squeak. This is insane, Preston said, his voice rising. It's theft. And then Margaret exploded. She slammed her hand on the table, a sudden, violent crack that made everyone jump. 19 million, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. After you took the company, after you took my home, this is unconscionable. It's unfair. We are the victims here. We are a family. You can't treat us like we're just common debtors. The room was silent. The echo of her scream fading. I had not spoken. I just watched her. I let the silence stretch, letting her words hang in the air. Victims, Aunt, I finally said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. All four of them turned to me. I am the one you've been calling a vulture, I said, my voice perfectly level. I am the heartless fund you've been slandering in the press. I stood up, slow and deliberate. I looked at Edward, whose face had gone slack with terror. I am the true friend who saved your company 7 years ago. Uncle? I looked at Margaret. I am the sole and exclusive owner of the Northline Trust. I am the lender. I am the person who loaned this family $80 million, and I am the adopted niece you told, at that dinner, was not real family. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a universe ending. Preston and Lila just stared. The calculation was happening, slow and agonizing, behind their eyes. They were not just realizing who I was. They were recalculating their entire lives. They were seeing every Christmas dinner, every vacation, every smug, entitled comment, and seeing my money, my signature, underneath it all. Preston looked like he was going to be physically sick. Edward just closed his eyes, a single, silent tear tracking down his ash-gray cheek. Only Margaret moved. She was a fighter. She saw the new board, the new angle. Her face, in an instant, changed from righteous rage to a grotesque, pleading warmth. "Chloe," she breathed. "Darling, it was you." She tried to laugh. It came out like a choke. "Oh, my dear child, why didn't you say, if I had known, if I had any idea it was your money, this is all just a terrible, terrible misunderstanding." She stood, her hands outstretched on the table. "We're family, Chloe. We're family. We can solve this. We can solve this right now. Just us, in this room. As family?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached into my briefcase, pulled out my cell phone, and placed it on the polished table between us. "You mean, as family, like when we had tea at your house? Aunt." Her eyes locked on the phone. She knew. I pressed play. The room filled with her voice, tinny and sharp and unmistakable. "You're just the adopted niece, Chloe. There's no blood tie. There's no legal, no moral obligation for us to share the real legacy with you." I pressed stop. The silence was even heavier this time. Margaret's face was white, her mouth a thin, bloodless line. Her own lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was staring at her in what looked like genuine disgust. Edward broke. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry, Chloe," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'm so sorry. I thought you knew, that the feelings were more important than the paperwork. I thought you understood that we loved you." He looked up, his eyes red and broken. "But I sat there. I was silent. Every time you were slighted, I was a coward. I was silent. I'm sorry." I looked at him, and for a second, I felt a stab of pity. But it was too late. Pity was a luxury we could no longer afford. "I understood perfectly, Uncle," I said. I turned my gaze to the whole table. "I gave this family 7 years," I said, my voice cold and clear. 7 years of my grandmother's legacy. I kept your company alive, so all of you could continue to call it your legacy. And in return, I was seated at the end of the table. I was told I was an outsider. I was told I had no blood tie. I was told I wasn't real. I sat down. This is not a family meeting. This is a meeting with your creditor, and I am giving you one final choice. I nodded at Noah. He took over, his voice all business. Option 1, he said, and his voice was like granite. Northline Trust files the lawsuit for the $19 million deficiency. Today, we will pursue it vigorously. We will place liens on all remaining personal assets, your other properties, your art collections, your stock portfolios. We will garnish your accounts. It will be public. It will be expensive. And we will win. You will be left with absolutely nothing. He paused, letting that sink in. A small, animal sound came from Lila's throat. Option 2, Noah continued. The trust is willing to forgive the remaining $19 million of personal debt in its entirety, a flicker of desperate, animal hope in Preston's eyes. Edward looked up. In exchange, Noah said. For this? He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. You will all sign this document. It is a public statement, to be released to the press. It states, clearly, that the Vulture Fund story was a complete fabrication. It states that Chloe Bennett was the sole anonymous lender who saved the company in 2017. It contains a full public apology for the decades of exclusion and for the recent slander campaign, and it contains a legally binding commitment to never, ever use the victim narrative again. He tapped the paper. You sign this. You walk away free. You don't. We proceed with option 1. It was a simple choice. $19 million, or their pride. Preston and Lila were staring at their mother. Edward was just looking at the paper. Margaret, Edward whispered, his voice hoarse. Sign it. Just sign it. It's over. Margaret was staring at me. Her face was a battleground. She looked at the paper. She read the words, public apology. She read the words, Chloe Bennett saved the company. Her eyes, when they met mine, were not the eyes of a debtor. They were not the eyes of an aunt. They were the eyes of a true believer, a zealot on her own funeral pyre. Slowly, deliberately. She pushed the paper back across the table. No, the word was quiet. Mother, Preston screamed, half standing. What are you doing? Sign the damn paper. No, Margaret repeated. Her voice was stronger now, shaking with a new, final, terrible pride. She looked at me. I will not apologize to her. I will not lower myself. I will not sign my name to a document that puts her a non-blood at the center of my family's story. Margaret, please, Edward begged, weeping openly. For the children. She thinks she's won. Margaret spat, her voice rising. But blood is blood, and she has none. I watched her. I watched this woman choose utter, complete financial ruin for herself, for her brother, for her children, just to deny me. One last time, just to hold on to her last, pathetic shred of blood superiority. I felt nothing, just a deep, cold, final stillness. The last ember of hope, the last microscopic cell that had wanted to be her family had died. I stood up. I looked at my lawyer. Option 1, I said. Please proceed with filing the suit for the full deficiency. No exceptions. No settlements. No, Lila shrieked, actually lunging across the table. Please, Chloe. Aunt Chloe. Please don't. He'll ruin us. We'll have nothing. Preston just sat there, his face hollowed out, staring at his mother as if she were a monster he was seeing for the first time. He finally understood. She had just, for the sake of her own ego, condemned them all. I looked at Lila, her tear-streaked, terrified face. I looked at Preston, the broken, entitled man-child. You had 7 years, I said, my voice quiet. And you had 45 days. You should have thought about your future then. I picked up my briefcase. I'm just giving you exactly what my aunt always taught me. The legacy is only for the real family. I turned and walked out. Noah followed. I didn't look back at the screaming, at the weeping, at the recriminations. I walked out of the room, into the elevator, and down to the street, I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The Chicago sky was a heavy, oppressive gray. But as I looked up, I saw a break in the clouds, a sliver of weak, watery sunlight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text, not from a lawyer, not from a Lockwood. It was from Samir Delgado. Chloe, Ms. Davis just held the first all-hands meeting. Midwest Apex is official. They're keeping the whole team, and they announced the 5% wage increase you suggested in the deal. The floor is going crazy. Thank you. From all of us. I stopped on the sidewalk. In that little patch of sun, I read the message again. I smiled. A real smile. I had lost a family that had never wanted me, but I had saved one, a family of 400 people I had protected. My aunt said the legacy was only for real family. That's fine. I just proved to the whole world that sometimes the one who pays the bills is the only family that's real, and blood is just a detail on a birth certificate. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to chat with you and hear your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and if you really want to support this channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.